I do recommend Meetup to a lot of my friends that are looking for different things. Wine tasting, movies, book club, meet a lot of new people, a lot of new friends, and it will make you more social.
What is a chess dynasty? Unceasing dominance, move after move, again and again and again.
We have a resignation, we have history.
He is the 5-time FIDE World Chess Champion.
But a chess dynasty can also be cruel. It forces most to defer their dreams until next time. If there is a next time.
It's losing.
Oh my God, did he just blow?
Yeah, he did.
I'm blown away. The game is over.
As the chess world turns to Kazakhstan, the Magnus Carlsen dynasty is set to close. The FIDE World Championship is finally up for grabs. For two chess superstars lying in wait, Until next time is now. Jan Nepomniachtchi has methodically done what he needed to do to get another shot at the title. The pressure to seize the moment this time rests heavily upon him.
Jan Nepomniachtchi saves the game with the black pieces, which means that he is one game closer to the World Championship title.
Ding Liren knows firsthand what the end of this dynasty means. An unexpected chance to make history. Can China's best turn his good fortune into eternal fame?
The rook pawn is going to be a draw, and Ding there with a smile gives it up. He knows there's no trying in this one. A hard-fought battle.
The legacy of this championship spans across centuries. It reads from the names of chess giants. For the first time in a decade, a new name will raise the trophy and be etched into chess history. It's the 2023 FIDE World Championship. Whose name will next be called champion?
Chess fever is on in Astana as the city hosts the ultimate battle to crown the king of classical chess. It's been a long journey for the two challengers to the halls of the St. Regis Hotel. And we are live inside the playing arena as we wait for Jan Nepomniachtchi and Ding Liren to arrive. It's now the final stretch of the FIDE World Championship match. Welcome everyone, I'm International Master Tanya Sachdev. Alongside me, my co-commentators, Grandmaster Robert Hess and Grandmaster Fabiano Caruana. 4 games remain. Jan Nepomniachtchi leads with 1 point. Ding Liren has to strike back to equalize. Right off the bat, Fabi, what's the one thing you're expecting from Ding today?
I don't know if it's so much expecting, but I think that he is in a position now when we're getting close to the end of the match when maybe it's time to take some extra risks. And we've seen these players both take risks during this match. But in the last few games, they've played rather quietly, steadily. But Ding is still down a point, and he doesn't want to let it get to that, final few games when he's in a must-win situation. I think he should try to take the chance now to get some chances.
As we get closer to the finish line in a 14-game match, each match becomes that much heavier. The pressure increases. The margin for error at this point for Ding Liren is 0. He needs to win a game. Jan Nepomniachtchi looking good. With every passing game, he gets closer to becoming world champion. Robert, what will be Jan's approach today?
Well, you say the margin for error for Ding Liren is nearly 0. The number of errors yesterday was pretty much 0. And for Jan Nepomniachtchi, I think it's going to be more of the same. Why should he take any risk? Why does he need to do anything different? He should play his solid, steady approach. Another draw will not be a bad result for him, especially because there's a rest day tomorrow, and then he can prepare to have the black pieces in the 12th round.
A draw in this match would mean that Jan just goes steps closer to that World Championship title, while for Ding it would mean 1 game less to strike back. So much at stake. The start of the World Championship match, this first half, was a fist fight with 5 decisive games starting from game 2. And then we saw 4 back-to-back victories with the white pieces. But going into the second half, we see the players treading more cautiously. They are taking less risks and playing with incredibly high accuracy. As we saw, starting from game 8, it was a draw, 3 back-to-back draws. In game 10, once again, with the white pieces, we saw Ding Liren push, exert pressure, but Jan had a principled approach to defense. And though Ding tried, Fabi, it was never close to being enough.
Yeah, yesterday we saw a nearly perfect, one could even say perfect game of chess. But at the moment, Ding doesn't want perfect games of chess. He wants a mess. He wants some blood. As Tal said, you want to take your opponent into a deep, dark forest. And that's what Ding needs at the moment. He really needs to get back into the equality of the match. And then, we'll see in the final few games. But I think it would be very difficult for him if we're going to the final game of the match and he needs to win. White pieces or not, you don't have amazing chances of winning a single game against a player as strong and as well prepared as Jan Nepomniachtchi. So every game is a chance. I think he should be trying to create complications and, a way for his opponent to make mistakes.
Yeah, I think for Ding, he needs to make the most of his chances, but he's just not going to get them. I'm sorry to say it. I know chat's going to hate me, but I expect a D word, a draw today. I think that's what is likely because Jan Nepomniachtchi, he wants to coast through to the finish line. He sees it. It's within his sight. So why should he take any risk? He has the white pieces. If he can liquidate, if he can make a draw, I think he's going to do that.
Big questions. How much will Jan push with white? Dingleren, will he be under pressure one more time with the black pieces? And will he be able to hold fort? It was a confident hold in game 10 by Jan Nepomniachtchi. And this is what Ding had to say about the outcome of the game.
Today I drew another white game. So it means there are only 4 games left. I need to at least score 1 win to level the score. It's become quite normal, like there are 3 draws in the 3 rounds. But okay, the tournament is still not finished yet. So okay, we still have 4 games left. I wouldn't say how much confidence am I now. I didn't consider that.
Four games left, 2 with the white pieces for Dingleren. Confidence will be a big factor in this one. And as we can see, our Chesscom stats team has given these odds based on the outcome, the result of today's game 11. It's going to be a big, exciting day of chess if Jan Nepomniachtchi with the white pieces wins. Essentially, it won't just be game over, it will be match over. It's nearly impossible. Dingleren will need the biggest of miracles to come back from a 2-point deficit. A 98% favorite for Jan there, with a draw still more than an 80% favorite. And if Ding strikes back with the black pieces, our stats team actually inches more towards Ding with a 47% to Jan Nepomniachtchi. Looking at these stats, Robert, is it fair to say that for Ding, it's more important to keep things under control, to not take extra risk than to try for a win today with black?
Yeah, for Dingleren, he gets 2 whites in the remaining 3 games after today. We've seen him create chances with the white pieces, not yesterday, but in game 8. That result may have been a draw, but he was winning. So as you said, confidence will be important for him. I think he should confidently try to neutralize the opening advantage today, and then he could take it from there.
Easier said than done, Robert, with Jan Nepomniachtchi starting with the white pieces. It is all going to come down to what is Jan's approach today. Will he be the one who'll try to close off the match today, maximize his chances, try to create chaos on the board? But the drawback of that strategy would be that Ding perhaps could get his moments in the game and strike back. Well, it's been a fascinating World Championship with so many decisive games. With the black pieces, we've seen only 1 win so far. And it was back in game 2 with Jan Nepomniachtchi drawing first blood in the match with a fantastic win with black. Apart from that, we've often seen in the match, the player playing black has struggled to neutralize out of the opening. Now, Jan hasn't lost a single game in this match with black. Ding, meanwhile, not just in this match, with the black pieces, Ding has not yet defeated Jan Nepomniachtchi in this World Championship match, as well as any of the classical games that they've played against each other. Robert, is that going to have a psychological effect on Ding going into today's game?
Yeah, Ding has not beaten Jan Nepomniachtchi with the black pieces. I don't think he is going to be aiming for that today. If an opportunity arises, he will try to make the most of it. But you can see Jan Nepomniachtchi there. Same salmon-colored shirt, same strong mental fortitude, same fantastic chess player as we've seen throughout this World Championship. So for Ding, he knows his opponent at this point, and he knows that he can't just drum up a win out of nowhere. He would have to take some serious risk, and I just don't think Ding needs to do that at this late stage. He still has 2 white games remaining. I don't think now is the time to let things go crazy.
Just 4 games remaining to getting our 17th chess world champion. Fabi, are you surprised to see Jan return with a pink shirt or not as much?
Well, I'm not his stylist, but if I were, I would tell him, maybe to try out a different color. They say variety is the spice of life. So let's see some different colors for these last few games. But I think that these last few games will be very interesting. As you said, Jan has never lost to Ding with the white pieces, and that's very relevant. But I still think that Ding should try to take his chances. Just because things haven't happened in the past doesn't mean that they can't happen today or potentially in the remaining black game that Ding will have. And I want to push back a little bit on what Robert said, because even though we have seen Ding create a lot of chances with the white pieces, I feel like it is possible he has exhausted his repertoire of ideas with white. And that might be why we saw the last game. He wasn't fully perfectly prepared for this bishop c5 move that Jan came out with. And I feel like he's trying to probe a little bit in various directions, trying to find some sort of weaknesses in Jan's opening repertoire, but he might have already used his main ideas in the earlier stages in this match.
Yeah. Very interesting, because even at the press conference, Ding actually confessed to being out of his preparation by move 9 with that move bishop c5 that you mentioned by Yan. We've seen Ding come up with these very combative, energetic opening surprises, but then with a one slight deviation by Yan, which perhaps is not the top move, it feels as if Ding tends to go into a think and finds himself out of his familiar preparation. Robert, has that surprised you a little bit? The fact that Ding is the one who is playing these amazing variations and these different openings, but very quickly is also the one who goes into a think tank.
Well, to push back against Fabiano's pushback here, we're good friends. We can argue sometimes. I think that Ding said it himself, that he was interested in risk minimization, because at the critical moment when he took that pawn on d6 yesterday and traded queens, he could have dropped his bishop back. That's actually what Fabiano was recommending. That would have provided him more winning chances. He seemed a bit nervous. He just wanted to get down to that end game where he couldn't possibly lose. Nothing could go wrong there. So I feel, to answer your question directly, Tanya, it has been a bit surprising. But I think that Ding Liren has shown his emotions. I think that he has been quite upfront with everybody watching that he is nervous, that things aren't going exactly his way, but he still is within the territory where he can win this match. He's only 1 point behind. And as we see the players getting seated there in Kazakhstan, I mean, Ding Liren, he knows what he needs to do today, and that is not lose.
I'm going to push back on both of you pushing back and say that definitely for a World Championship preparation, Ding's prep today has to not lack that depth. He cannot afford to burn the clock early on. Yan playing with the white pieces, Ding has to be sure that he has those critical minutes, reaching time control, reaching move 40. It is something that Yan can play on by not taking too much risk perhaps in the opening stages, but making sure that he poses the big question when the clock runs low. We see both players seated. I'm expecting the jackets to come off, meticulously be placed on the chairs. First moves are about to happen. And of course, that begs the question to be asked. 1e4 by Yan, is that a mutual vote?
I'm going to go with yes. I think e4. I don't think it's time to experiment for Jan, because as you guys both pointed out, he's in the lead and there's no reason to take unnecessary risk. You're in the lead. Of course, you're playing with the white pieces, and I think Jan will still have some ambition, of course, in this game, but he's not going to want to put himself in a position where he's potentially losing the game. That would be a complete disaster and put Ding not only back in the match, but arguably as a favorite, especially in the psychological sense, because winning with the black pieces in such a crucial game, that would be so huge psychologically and in the match score. So I think e4, and you know what I hope to see? I don't know if I expect it, but I hope to see a Sicilian Najdorf.
You actually said that yesterday, Fabi, and Robert, you were quite amused with that prediction at the close of the show after game 10. And I have to ask you, what are the chances of us actually seeing a Najdorf today, Robert?
This is one where I trust Fabi, and I think that it would be excellent to see a Najdorf. And I just want to say I agree completely with what Fabi's been saying. And I'm looking at this game, I'm looking at the opening stage. Jan has had advantages with the white pieces. Let's not forget that 2 games ago in game 9, Jan actually had an advantage, and he was disappointed with that draw. So he is an ambitious player. If the situation occurs where he can play for an edge, he will do just that. But he wants to minimize his own risk. The players, I mean, they're seated, they're ready. I think that Dingley Ren, he's looking at this board intently, and I think we should all intently wait for his first move, because if it's c5, it's a Sicilian. Bobby, you're going to be a proud commentator and colleague of Dingley Ren.
Oh, I will be super proud. But, I don't know what I would do if I was in his position. It's easy to say, play the Sicilian, go all out, try to take advantage of perhaps Jan's uncertainty in terms of, should I play for a win? Should I play it solidly? That is a sort of vulnerable psychological state where you can try to, and here we see the first move, e4, played. Not a surprise, but will Jan, because he's not obligated to play that first move, he's taking it back. Will he play it, or will he choose something else?
I think he's just taken back to make it himself. And we see that Ding get up, take off the jacket. He's going to sit right back, and we're going to have handshakes at the start of the game. Wow, 1e4 is what we're expecting. It's going to be a big shocker if Jan actually decides to play something else, simply because he's been getting such great positions out of the opening. Ding's the one who's been challenged to neutralize White's advantage. And as the match etches towards that finish line, it becomes that much more difficult. Psychologically, the pressure increases to get out of the opening without too much trouble. Ding so far hasn't been that successful in this one. Guys, 1 e6, the French, I don't believe that's going to happen. The clocks have started. 1 e4, that call was an easy one to make. But with Dingley Ren, what will he start with? Will he reach out for c5? No, he goes with e5, the king's pawn opening. Fabi, you look disappointed.
A little bit. Okay, are we going to see a Berlin again? Yeah, I feel like it's going in that direction because it was a very successful opening for Ding in the last game where he played with the black pieces. Going back to the anti-Marshall, he's hesitating here a bit, but I think he'll probably go for the Berlin.
I don't think so, Fabi. I think the fact that he's thinking right now, I'm going to say it's not going to be a Berlin. And we have a move. It's the Spanish.
You called it. It will be probably an anti-Marshall, unless will Ding go for an Archangelisk? B5, Bishop C5? I mean, he's shown that he's surprising him in every game. He's playing a different opening every game, but he reverts to his usual repertoire, the Marshall.
Robert, at this stage, I would love to see a Marshall happen. Do you think Jan will allow that, or will he go for an anti-Marshall?
I think he'll go for an anti-Marshall. I mean, there's no reason why he should go into the treacherous territory that is the Marshall used in so many world championships past. And I think that for Jan, he's just trying to think, what does Dingley Ren want from me? And there it is. He plays d3. We're starting with these closed variations. It's going to be a slower build-up. And I think a good choice by both of these players, because for Ding, he plays his normal repertoire. It works very well for him. A couple days ago, from the opening stage, he made that rook b8, a bit of a timid move. But if he doesn't show hesitation, there's no reason why he should fear the opening stage, as he's proving with the black pieces he can do quite well.
And this was how Jan beat Ding in the 2020 candidates. A very crucial game, which was instrumental, you could say, in Jan winning the 2020 candidates and qualifying for his first World Championship match in 2021. And so the game will probably continue a3 here. There is also a4, there's c3. But yeah, a3. c3 was what we saw earlier in the match. But a3 is the main move, and now the question is, will Ding play knight a5, c5 immediately, or will he castle knight c3 and then likely knight a5? I think he'll go for the very modern approach, knight a5, bishop a2, c5. White's idea in these positions is to develop the knight to c3, and Black's idea is usually to get that knight from c6 to a better square, to open up the path of the c-pawn to gain a bit more space in the center. Although so the game in the 2020 candidates continued castle, knight c3, knight a5, bishop a2, bishop to e6, and here b4. And bishop takes a2, rook a2, knight c6, bishop g5, knight to d7. Or no, not knight to d7. Sorry, I think it was actually
You're allowed
queen to d7. Yes, Queen to d7. Yeah.
I was gonna say you're allowed to forget, Fabi. It's okay, but apparently your memory kicked right
No,
back in there.
I saw this game recently when reviewing the recent games between, or the past games between Jan and Ding, the past decisive games, and this was obviously a very important one. And White took on f6, played knight d5, and Black surprisingly allowed the knight takes f6. This was obviously preparation by both players, but Jan came better prepared and won a very, very interesting game. And Ding is hesitating because Black has a really major choice here. Does he want to castle or knight a5 first? And the modern approach is to not castle, is to play knight a5 immediately. And after bishop a2, c5. Actually, Ding played this against me in 2016. Knight c3, bishop to e6, and I played knight to h4. And also some sort of modern theory. At the time, it was considered dubious for Black, but these days it's considered completely fine for Black. Very often, Black is trying to play c4 to completely shut off that bishop on a2. And White's idea is to play knight f5. For example, if castle here, knight to f5. I think this is like big theory. Bishop f5, e f5, d5. Otherwise, White will gain the light squares. Bishop to g5, attacking, indirectly attacking that pawn d5, and then c4, and some sort of very unclear theory. And I don't remember exactly the details, but I think rook to e1 here or queen to e1 is some sort of theory. It's considered a good line for Black, but it's very confusing because tactically speaking, it's very close to being bad for Black. For example, I think this queen to e1 move is at this moment, and it's also preparing rook to d1, as well as attacking e5 and eyeing the knight on a5. So it's a very multi-purpose move. We could see something like this. It's not out of the question at all. But I actually suspect that Jan will have some new idea in this line because, as we know, Ding has been a lifelong martial player. So for Jan, this was like a main point of interest before the match. So of course he would come to this opening armed with ideas in all sorts of variations. That's to be expected. We already saw he had two very serious ideas earlier in this match against Andy Marshall. So I suspect we'll see a third very serious idea.
And I just want to continue this line a couple more moves, because if Black plays h6, just to illustrate Fabi's point, then knight takes d5 is available. The queen on d8 is overloaded, needed to defend the knight here, because the queen takes knight in return, White steals a pawn. So a very instructive line, a very deep variation. And Fabi, what we're seeing on the board right now, this may be one of the variations, not that end line, because that would be a blunder, but we see c5 and knight c3. So following the path that you just laid out for us.
Yeah, I think bishop to e6 is the move here. And after bishop to e6, will he play knight h4, or there's some positional lines involving bishop to g5, but knight h4 is the most critical move. But yeah, Jan is going for, it's a similar approach to when we saw that earlier game where he played an early c3 instead of a3. And then he tried to chop off the knight on f6, and indeed he did, with the idea of exploiting the d5 square. So it seems like Jan just likes these positions in principle. It's actually so similar to that game from a positional strategic point of view. I think Black is going to, make some move which allows bishop takes f6. For example, short castle here should be quite a normal move. And then we see the trade-off between the bishop pair and the light square outpost on the d5 square.
Yeah, one of the big drawbacks of putting your pawns 2 squares apart is the square in between is your opponent's for the taking. That's why the bishop came to g5 to take this knight on f6 and then plop a pony on d5. And very instructive is that, typically speaking, you don't want to take this bishop on e6. That does double Black's pawns. And for those of you who are new to chess, you've heard that double pawns are bad because they can't protect each other. But here, a pawn on e6 would actually cover some very important squares. It's not just the d5 square. Let's not forget Fabi's big idea of knight h4 to f5. That's not going to happen if there's a pawn sitting on e6. Not to mention there's also an open f-file for the rook once the king castles. So just, you're not taking on e6. That's not the point of this variation. It is to put that knight on d5.
Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting strategic battle. There aren't many concrete lines here. I don't think that Black should try to avoid. Sometimes you play knight to d7 to avoid the trade of bishop for knight, to keep that knight, which is a better defender of the light squares, obviously, than dark square bishop, which can never, ever control those light squares. But here it looks like black having not castled probably should take the opportunity to castle before, before allowing the position to become concrete. And yeah, then white will probably at some point take on f6. I think that will happen. I mean, there's no other idea behind bishop g5 besides taking that. And then we have a position which is similar to, I forget which game was it, as you can help me out here, where we saw this structure and this was a game.
Ooh, I'm trying to remember now myself because they all sort of merged together.
I think
in
game
my mind.
5 is game 5 correct, because Ding lost the second, drew the third, won the fourth, and lost the fifth. So it could have been game 5.
It sounds right. Where there eventually was the open e file and the knight versus the bishop, and that's exactly what we're talking about, right? You take this knight on f6, you leave black with questionable dark square bishop. So I believe it was game 5. Of course, we can verify that pretty easily.
But in that game, the a file was opened up, which, generally speaking, I would consider to be a bit of an advantage for white compared to having it closed here. Because I think if white ever plays a4 in this sort of position, black will probably play b4 at this point. Just because it's such a space gaining sort of gains so much space on the queen side and keeps the a file closed. The knight on a5, it's actually quite a decent piece if a4 b4 happens. So knight d5 immediately we could see here a number of ideas for black. I mean, knight c6 is the most obvious move because you kind of avoid b4 stuff. You get your knight back into the center a little bit. And long-term plans like g6 to drop the bishop back to g7 where it can't be captured. And, I think in that earlier game we saw the fight between white trying to get h4, h5, and black wasn't quite in time to play h5 himself to prevent that expansion. So g6 immediately makes a lot of sense, but knight c6 or g6 might not have changed a whole lot.
Yeah.
Here,
Well, you've been talking about an expansion on the queen side, right? And you mentioned the move knight c6, which kind of does fight against ideas of b4 because it allows the a pawn to advance after that. But then this move g6, just mixing up the move order, it does give Yan the opportunity to go immediately with the move b4. That is very committal. The other plans in these positions, Fabi, have always been to push the c pawn first. So you go c3, and then you try and get b4 in. You just delay it, keep it a bit flexible, either b4 or a4. It gives you the time to decide that. Are you expecting Yan? I see him. He's also thinking about this. He was perhaps expecting the knight retreat before this pawn advance on the king side. But of course, as always, Yan plays quickly. He plays fast. A non-committal move, queen d2, with a big direct threat. Watch out for that knight on a5, the queen on d8. You pointed it out in another position, Robert. It is overloaded currently, defending that bishop on f6, defending that knight on a5. So knight f6 is a big threat. Looks like it's time to come back with that knight. Knight c6 coming up.
I think so. And I think the point of this move is in case black plays bishop g7 at some moment, white may consider the move knight to g5. I think probably knight c6 instead of bishop g7 looks a bit safer for black. But in many variations, that will certainly come to mind as an option. And after knight c6, what's his idea? It could be to play a4, because you mentioned that c3 b4 idea, but with the queen on d2, I don't see that as preparing c3 b4 so much. Feels like maybe a4 is the plan, because now with b4, is there some sort of like a5 stuff? I don't know. Because knight takes a5 loses a piece, knight f6 followed by bishop takes e6. Little tactic there. And the idea of a5 from a like strategic sense is to make the a6 pawn a bit of a long-term weakness. But then there's bishop g7. I don't know if this makes any sense for white. White can play knight to b6 here, but it might be a bit of a senseless pawn advance to a5.
Yeah, because the a5 pawn might just be captured at some point in the near future. And the bar is going up and down a little bit, so it's still relative equality, but it just feels like that pawn may not be too long for this board in some
I was just
lines.
hoping like bishop to c4 here would maybe encourage black to take on c4. And basically, I want to trade those bishops because I want to leave a pure bad bishop position, right? The bishop on g7 versus a lone knight would be the ideal goal. But one player I look to as like trying to combat this sort of bad bishop narrative is Magnus, because at some point he was playing the Sveshnikov, and he was playing a very specific line against the Rosalimo, which is White's main way of combating or trying to avoid the Sveshnikov. And he was playing very specifically with a very bad bishop on g7, with pawns on c5 and e5, and then White would play h4, h5, and he would even play h6 and g5. So he put all his pawns on dark squares with that bishop on g7, and you would think, what an awful piece. How could a strong player ever want to go for that sort of position? But it turns out that the bishop is a very good defender of the dark squares, and if the position ever opens up, the bishop starts to like terrorize all the dark squares. So it actually discourages the opening up of the position, which means that White doesn't have as much strategic potential. For example, in this position, if White ever goes for f4 ideas, the bishop suddenly becomes very powerful. So this bishop, bad though it may be, kind of discourages White from opening the center with c3, d4, with f4, and various other typical ideas in similar positions.
And to chat, who's saying that Ding will try to push for a win today, that would be the dream, but given the match situation and playing with black, here's a reminder of a fun fact that Ding has actually never won a game with the black pieces against Yan. Yan has never lost with white against Ding. And second, as we were mentioning in the open as well, that the feeling is that for today's game, it's more important for Ding to hold, to keep things under control, than to push extra hard for a win. With the black pieces, when you're trying to win, you need to take risks. You need to create chances for both sides. The forest that Fabi, you were earlier alluding to, the forest of Mikhail Tal, where you draw your opponent in and the path to get out is narrow enough for just one of them. And that would mean big risk at this stage. Dinglerin cannot afford to lose a game. I have to ask you guys, we're on move 14 right now. Ding is thinking currently, given the position, the way it's gone, who has this opening been a success for, Robert?
Well, I would say Jan Nepomniachtchi, just based on the amount of time that he has spent, based on the position itself. Black's plan is not abundantly clear. We just mentioned several plans for white. C3, B4, kind of trying to break open the position. If black tries to keep the bishop pair, then this move knight g5 is really annoying to deal with. And I feel like one of the big questions, and I know the chat has been asking this, is how to unbalance the position in this opening. And we should already take stock that black has a dark square bishop and white has an extra knight. So that is, in a way, an unbalanced position, right? That is not the same pieces for each side. But the problem is this dark square bishop, as Fabiano was talking at length about, it just doesn't have open terrain. It may discourage white from pawn breaks, because if this bishop stays on the board, a typical idea like f4 is not very appealing if the bishop gets an open diagonal, but it's just going to stare into its own pawns, whereas the knights, well, they actually exert their force on the position. The knight on f3 is not so great, but if the bishop drops back, then that knight hops forward to g5. So that does look promising for white. The d5 square control is great. The fact that white controls some of the pawn breaks is really nice, namely b4. And black certainly does not want to take on b4 to open up this rook on a1 to a backwards pawn. So I feel like white does have a bit more flexibility in the position. But all that being said, black is super, super solid. There's no target in the position to exploit. So I think the move knight c6 or even the move bishop g7 allowing knight g5, both of those moves are options. I would prefer knight c6. I don't want to see my opponent's pieces hop forward, so I think bringing that piece from the rim back towards the center would be the good start.
One of the things that we're being asked about is that what are the chances of an unbalanced complication from this opening? And Robert, I just want to follow up on the point that you were making, that perhaps if Ding does want an unbalanced approach for this game, yes, the idea of knight c6 looks super safe, but maybe that might incline him and push him towards, in fact, that bishop retreat that we've been talking about. Because the point of that bishop retreat, or what we might not like with white after that, is the move knight to g5. But if you just look at that position a little closer, and let's say that black was actually to lose the light squared bishop on e6, double up those pawns in the center, but what you get in return is more control over that d5 square, an open f file. To me, at first, that looks like exactly the kind of unbalanced position that you want if you're in a must-win situation. So let's say you come back with your knight to c6 right now, fall back with the knight, and if white was to take on e6. Of course, this is a decision that you can delay, but to speak structurally, this is quite an imbalanced middle game. You've doubled your pawns, open f file, the queen can come to e7 once the knight falls back, the e6 pawn is attacked, you can step up with your queen, connect your rooks, the knight someday can jump to d4, double up on the f file. Fabi, is this the kind of position that will give both players chances?
Yeah, this is a very difficult strategic decision for white to make because, as you pointed out, the light square bishop being off the board would be a bad thing for black because of the weakness of the d5 square. But the pawn coming to e6 gives a lot of control to that d5 square. And if white, for example, drops back the knight to e3, which sooner or later probably white will have to, not at the moment. You know, the knight on e5, d5 is not directly threatened, but it will be soon. Yeah, this would be bad, but black can simply play, you know, some move like rook to c8, for example, to defend the knight, or king to h8 to get the king out of the way of the diagonal. Looks especially reasonable. And okay, so white at some point plays knight to e3, and black defends the e6 pawn, probably with queen to e7 comes to mind as a very logical way. And yeah, the question is, what does white achieve with this? Because where are your pawn breaks? Okay, a4 will probably be met by b4. I don't see how that improves the position so much for white. c3 and d4 will never happen. Black controls d4 with literally 4 attackers. And c3 and b4, but the question is, do you actually want to take on c5? And if not, what is the point of c3 and b4? So I don't see white's direct play here, which means that black, who has a direct idea to someday prepare d5, king h8, rook d8, and maybe queen f7, maybe bishop h6, something to prepare d5. Black has the idea, so I'd prefer black. I'd prefer to play with the black pieces in this type of position. And that's why I agree with you that maybe knight g5 takes e6 is not a very dangerous strategic approach. So what would white do in case someday bishop drops back to g7? Because as we saw in the featured chat, the question was, will we see unbalanced complications? And I think at the moment the position is very unbalanced. Not in terms of complications. There's no tactics at the moment, no big tactics, but it is very unbalanced in the sense that black has a bishop pair, white has light square control and an outpost on d5. But black has that long-term idea of king h8 and f5 and starting play on the king side. That's a pawn break which black has, and white has pawn breaks as well, but that one really comes to mind. Knight c6, king h8, and of course not with the knight on g5, but someday f5 move could come, and you know, the typical King's Indian sort of a pawn storm attack, right? We've seen this in the King's Indian, and he plays bishop g7 immediately, not knight c6.
And I think that was a critical decision, right? In chess, we speak of these critical moments, which often in our head is about long calculations, tactics that might be coming on. But very often it is these positional decisions, deciding which bishop to give, deciding which kind of a middle game are you really aiming for. Knight to c6 would have given up the dark squared bishop for Ding, while the move bishop g7 invites Yan to grab up that bishop on e6. And as our chat was forecasting, that would mean an imbalanced middle game, an imbalanced approach to this game. And Ding goes for it. Robert, do you think this decision by him, which looks slightly, well, aggressive, more aggressive than the one of falling back with the knight, you think that is influenced by the mat situation?
I think it's just a good move. I mean, the more that we talk about the position, the more I'm thinking, well, maybe Ding's opening is working out for him. Because if knight g5 isn't particularly scary to meet, then we have a position where it's not just going to be symmetrical pawn structure, same pieces, let's just shake hands. No, right now, only one side has a dark square bishop, and it is Ding Liren. Whether or not that's a good piece remains to be seen. And the last thing that Ding wants to do is ever take this knight on d5 and allow the bishop into the d5 square. That would be a mistake. So after knight g5, we keep talking about this, allowing white to take on e6. I think that would be a beneficial exchange for black. But both sides have some things that are going their way. This bishop on a2 would stare down this diagonal at a pawn on e6, which means that pawn would need to be defended. And where black's continuation would come from is honestly just as difficult to spot as white's, because if we could just look at that line once more, say knight g5, knight c6, takes, and as Fabi was saying, you can spend a move. Your knight is not under attack because this tactic, if bishop takes d5, would be check. and this knight would be threatened. So c3 is a useful move, and if we play king h8, then knight back to e3, queen e7, this type of position, I mean, what is the risk in this position for white? I'm not really seeing any big issues.
So he did play his move, and actually I wanted to ask a question, because a move suddenly occurred to me, and I know we said it should never be played, but after knight c6, my eye fell on this move f4. And since he played the move, it might become relevant. And the point is, if e takes f4, yes, you opened up your bishop on the long diagonal, but knight takes e6, fe6, and knight takes f4, and you're just losing that e6 pawn, and it doesn't. The b2 pawn is rather irrelevant compared to that one. And here it just looks like, I don't know, what does black do? I mean, I don't see any good move. Maybe it's already bad for black, in fact. So after f4, how are you continuing? Because if you take on d5, bishop d5 is super disruptive, hitting that knight on c6, and doesn't look very good for black either. So so f4, what is the response?
And while you guys contemplate that, I'm going to give you a fun fact in this position. I know you boys are going to love this one. So Jan went for the move knight g5, right? According to my database, there's only one game that I have in front of me with the move bishop to g7 in that position. Knight c6 was played more often. And Robert, if we just back up to that moment right before knight g5 happened, so there's one game that's been played in which white went queen to g5, and it continued with f6 and the queen falling back to e3. And I'm going to give you 3 guesses. Who played with white, Robert? It's a good friend of yours.
Mouse slip, because knight to g5 was the correct. A good friend of mine. Fabi, did you play this? Was that a trick question?
He would remember.
I don't think so.
It wasn't Fabi, but it was Daniel Naroditsky who played this position with the white pieces. He went queen g5. It was in a title Tuesday against Andrew Tang. And the game eventually ended in white's favor. Queen g5 was Daniel's move of choice in that blitz game. But of course, knight g5 just feels like the move that you've got to make here.
I gotta say, I'm a bit concerned by how many games in this World Championship match are following either Title Tuesday games or Lee chess games between anonymous accounts. There's been a lot of them. I mean, like yesterday was also a Title Tuesday game, but by Jan himself especially was quite funny. But now we're following another Title Tuesday game by Danya, and or almost, because Jan did deviate with what appears to be a more dangerous move. I wonder what Ding had in mind when he played bishop g7, because maybe he thought knight c6 and then suddenly he sees that f4 is quite a scary little pawn thrust. So on the other hand, if white can I mean, it's not a move with like a super direct threat. Okay, f5 is a threat, but how does black respond to this? Maybe bishop to d7? Is that... Because if fe5...
Isn't there some problem down this line?
Yeah, but fe5, knight e5, the knight does cover the f7 pawn. Ooh, is f5 super strong here? I guess it's f5.
Yep, it is f5. Good find there. I mean, the problem is this pressure is just overwhelming after fg6. You likely will lose material at some point down this line. And bishop h6, I think this is an important line to show for everyone, that it looks like you're pinning this knight, but it's not a king behind the knight. It's not an absolute pin, which means the knight can still move in many of these lines. First of all, f6 might also be unpleasant. h4 is available, but I'm wondering at some point, can I just take this pawn on f7? Probably.
I know what you're going for there, but yeah, it's so tempting. I don't think it works right here, because if there was a rook on d1, it would work beautifully. But what if we just play f6? I mean, okay, I don't care about all your threats. I don't care if I'm not mating you immediately. Long term, that king is not going to be very happy.
No, because you can't even go king h8, because then my idea works perfectly. It's not an absolute pin that I can legally move. You have to take because you're in check, and then I get your bishop over here, and I'm going to checkmate you in the near future, most likely. So this line after f4, it looks very scary, and I guess we have to do our due diligence and try to come up with ideas for black. Bishop d7 doesn't work out because of f5. Most moves probably won't really work out because of f5. We said taking on f4 doesn't help because of the knight takes e6 line. At the very least, white will win a pawn there. Is there like a knight e7? I'm scared to make a move like this.
I was thinking about that, but then I Yeah, knight to e7 definitely because it stops f5, and knight takes e6, f e6, knight e7, queen e7, and now f5 is very critical. But black certainly can play gf5, ef5, and is d5 safe? F e6, queen e6. It doesn't seem to be a problem because you can't attack d5 very clearly. And I'll play c4 next, and we saw this idea in some similar lines, some other lines from his variation, where the bishop gets locked out of the game. If the bishop was on, for example, f3, I think this position would be pretty dubious for black, but the bishop on a2 could get really restricted very quickly. So maybe I was also thinking after knight g5, maybe bishop to h6. Sorry, after knight c6, f4, maybe bishop to h6 is a possible move because you can't move
Okay.
your f pawn anymore.
Right.
But h4
And
maybe.
just throw your pawns for this. It looks ridiculous, right? White is just throwing all the kingside pawns up the board, the side that he's castled on, and yet it's working out because white is the one who is launching the attack first. I mean, this bishop on a2, it's just waiting in the wings. The opening of the f file could be very dangerous for this black king, and knight takes e6 at some point will be in the question. Not to mention this f5 pawn thrust. It looks really dangerous for black.
H4 would be an idea that's definitely in the air in many such positions to try to advance the f pawn. And knight g5, the fact that Ding played bishop g7 and then goes into another long think after knight g5, a 7-minute think, it's a bit concerning. He's got enough time and he should be taking a lot of time in this position. But knight g5 is, of course, the first response that you look at after you make the move bishop to g7, the retreating move. Is Ding uncomfortable? Robert, you mentioned that Yan's the one who can feel slightly a small victory there out of the opening. This feeling that, well, it's been more successful for white than for black because of the time management. And I think it's safe to say that Ding is feeling the heat after this knight g5 f4 idea that you've been discussing.
Yeah, no, Fabi's F4 idea, it's funny because he led me to believe it wasn't possible because it opens up this bishop. And then as soon as I stopped thinking about it, he's like, oh, what about F4? That looks like a good try. It does look quite dangerous for black because white is the one throwing pawns forward. That being said, we see the eval bar off to the side. So we know that Ding probably knows that as well. This is really just out of the opening stage. He is spending time, I think, quite wisely because black has several good-looking options. Knight to c6, as we've been talking about. It looks like the main move. They're moving bishop back to d7. That doesn't really feel right at first glance to me because you are allowing this bishop on a2 to shine. But maybe then black will kick the knight out from g5. Try to play king h8 and f5, play this in the king's Indian style. That's not completely out of the question. So if Ding is thinking about this from a match perspective, I want to win the game, then bishop d7, trying to get h6 in becomes more appealing. I'm just really scared. I'm being honest with everybody. I'm scared of this bishop on a2 on an open diagonal.
And
Yeah, Robert, everything that you're mentioning, I'm also slightly surprised simply with Ding's time management here because this is in fact a position that he has had himself not even a year ago. It was in the Speed Chess Championship with the black pieces. Ding had this position playing against Nihal Serene, but it was the move Queen D2. That was the new move by Yan. And despite that, Ding has to be familiar with these setups. He knows the dangers that are there. This is a world championship level prep that we're talking about. So, us feeling that Ding is feeling the heat right now, and the fact that he's gone into this think tank, having played this position with the black up till the point that Gan deviated with the move Queen D2, it's definitely concerning for Ding fans, especially when you're faced with this problem that White is actually going to just pawn storm down on the king side and create and develop this attack. Fabi, how worried would you be with black here?
I would be rather concerned, and I think there is a reason why, although he has this position, that he might not, be super well familiar with all the subtleties here, which is that it's not a very concrete position, so you can easily get confused with all the move orders. Do I play knight c6 first? Do I play bishop g7 first? Uh, Instead of queen d2, white had for sure like several options, so a lot of that can lead you to not remember every single detail of every possible move that white has. So I'm not surprised that he's thinking, because as we saw also in this match, he's played like 5 different openings against e4. So being able to play so many openings, it naturally means that you might, because you have to remember so much in so many openings, that you might be less familiar with all the subtleties in a certain sideline. But I actually had a question for you guys. Uh, do you feel comfortable when you're being attacked like this, when your opponent's being aggressive? Are you more like, I'm happy to defend and then counterattack, or are you, I want to attack and I want to be aggressive and I don't want to be on the back foot in the game?
Hmm. Robert, do you want to go first or should I?
I was letting you go first. I was curious what you had to say.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would want to be the one who's on the attacking side, the one who's exerting pressure, and I think that would be the scenario for most of us. It's never pleasant to have to deal with these decisions out of the opening, especially out of the opening. I think once it happens, when you're way into the middle game, things change, tactics evolve, strategy changes. It's still fine to be on defense from time to time, but coming out, going into move 15, and feeling that your opponent is building this attack on the king side of opening up the f file, f4 coming in, I would, at this moment, definitely start feeling the nerves and feeling uncomfortable. And yeah, I don't know about you, Robert, but I would not want to be black right now.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, Fabi, I'm not Homov. Like, what do you want from me? I'm not this and crazy resourceful defender who doesn't mind my king being blasted open just because I can prove every single time that I can calculate one step further. I typically don't really mind that much about my king being attacked, but I would definitely favor the side. For example, if the bishop dropped back, I would love this bishop on a2. I think just the piece placement is also glorious for white at this stage. So it's not like you're all in on this attack and then you've completely compromise your structure. That's why I feel like in this particular position, white is doing quite nicely. And I did want to show one quick variation because I think some people will be tempted to pin this knight on g5. And it's something I was mentioning before. Just because there is a more valuable piece behind this knight doesn't mean that the knight can't move. So just to quickly show a line here is that if bishop h6 were to be played, white doesn't just have to defend the knight. In fact, white will take the bishop, because if you take back, I get your bishop, thank you very much. So you're going to take my queen. Oh, that's a good queen, but so is yours, thank you. And after rook takes here, we have a position with bishops of opposite color. But this isn't just some equal endgame. That's not what we're seeing at this point. I think white strikes first with f4. You could also throw in rook d1 first, maybe that's even better. But my major point was after pawn takes, a knight takes f4 here, if we get a position where you have to do this, I'm wondering if the pressure down on f7, that bishop sitting on a2, it's maybe promising for white. I'm not positive about all this. Clearly, the eval bar doesn't fully agree. But Fabi, I was just wondering what would happen if this kind of transition occurred.
Yeah, this could be promising for white, although king g7 followed by f6 does defend against the immediate threats. But certainly black would not want to allow that position with the knight on d5, with the opposite color bishops outposted there, even if white doesn't do anything special, even when white plays c3 here, followed by, maybe a4, b4. Looks like a pretty lousy endgame. You might draw this, but you're not having any fun doing so. But Ding played a different move, and it's not one we consider. It's a very exciting one. c4. We did mention this idea. You cut off the bishop on a2, as you said. Very strong piece, so definitely good to get it out of the game a little bit. On the other hand, that c4 pawn, it's it's a bit of a tender spot as well. If that pawn falls, then everything falls for black. So this is very concrete all of a sudden. And I'm thinking white should take on e6 at this point, because, well, you kind of want to deal with the bishop takes d5 threat, which is now a threat. White would not want to capture with the pawn and double the pawns and spoil the structure somewhat. So, but then after fe6, do you play knight to e3? Certainly comes to mind. But then, what happens next? Bishop to h6, maybe. I feel knight e6, fe6, knight e3 is a critical line. Like, that's the first thing you calculate. d5 just loses a pawn because ed5, knight d5. It's exactly like that line you mentioned before, pretty much to a T, the same tactic, although in a very different position. And queen d5, queen a5, white is probably just completely, at least up a pawn, and it looks like a pretty important pawn to me. So after knight e3, what's the move? Rook c8 is coming to mind for sure.
Why not bishop h6 after knight e3? The idea is that we've been looking at.
Yeah, I thought bishop h6 is a really natural move as well, but I was worried maybe that white will play rook a to d1 and target that d pawn. But who knows? This is some sort of mess for sure.
Yeah. Weak pawns there. The c4 move by Ding, very committal. And look at Yan. He's got that pose that we saw from him back in game 9 where he feels that perhaps he's got some opportunity here. He's got a bit of a chance here to try to create something. C4, a big move, but a very committal one. And Yan there takes a sip and decides to go into a think because that's what he needs to do at this point to see how he can make the most of this pawn structure that we've been looking at. And while Yan does that and comes to a decision, we will go into a short break. The game is heating up. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. World Quant is an official partner of the Chess.com broadcast of the FIDE World Championship. They are a global firm that builds complex mathematical models to identify market inefficiencies. Now, World Quant Brain is bringing together its international quant championship and the chess community to hunt down the next generation of quant finance specialists. Because nobody knows how to analyze a position better than a chess player, right? If you think you have what it takes, register now for the International Quant Championship. Head to go.chess.com/IQC or use command IQC in chat for more details. And we are in a critical moment of a game 11 as we see a big move has been made by Ding Liren. It is playing with fire, Fabi, as you were mentioning when we went into break, that c4 just explodes open the position. You are committing to pawn weaknesses on the queen side. What does Ding have in mind? What does he get in return? He shuts down that bishop on a2, but this is a move that if you don't do something immediately to neutralize the pressure on the pawns, in a couple of moves, Ding could end up being down a pawn in this game.
Yeah, this is certainly very double-edged, and I'm surprised by the speed at which he played it. We were looking at knight c6. That was the first move which came to mind to us, but I think that Ding was afraid of f4. And this one, yeah, I think that Jan will take on e6 and play knight e3. Nothing else comes immediately to mind as a very obvious continuation. And then black has, I think, a variety of ways of defending the c-pawn. Of course, you don't want to take on d3 because of the intermediate bishop takes e6 check. You might not even want to take on e3 in general sense, but especially now because bishop e6 simply wins a pawn. And so then you have a choice of, we already saw why d5 is a bad move, so you have to defend c4. You have either queen c7, rook c8, or bishop h6, the move you mentioned, Tanya, not defending c4 directly, but defending it indirectly by pinning the knight on e3. And in all cases, I think no matter which move black plays, white can develop the a1 rook to d1 because the d6 pawn is also a potential weakness. So black has to deal with multiple weaknesses in the position. I think it's an opening success for Jan. It's not necessarily a much better position, but certainly he has pressure and also safety. White has less weaknesses than black. Even if things go slightly wrong and black consolidates fully, it's only consolidation that's enough for equality, not for an advantage. So, yeah, excellent situation for Jan, especially given the match situation. You know, safe way to play for an advantage. Sign me up. I'm sure that Jan is very happy.
Must be at this point. I mean, how could he? The lines that you're showing, Fabi, the fact that there's this d6 backwards pawn, rook comes to d1, some very natural moves from White's perspective. But I play devil's advocate a little bit because if black is able to defend both of those pawns, the bishop is shut out of play. I feel like at least you don't have a symmetrical structure. There are some opportunities for black to push forward, especially in the event of a trade on e6. If eventually black can get this pawn forward to d5, those pawns start rolling. I mean, ultimately, I agree with you. How could I not? White does have a better position there, but I'm thinking long term, if Jan doesn't keep everything under control, I could see a future where black suddenly has some chance of his own.
Yeah. On that note, Jan goes for the line that you were mentioning, trades off the bishop first, expecting him to also trade the pawn on c4. I think just talking about Ding's thought process of putting that move c4 on the board, it's pretty clear that he really did not want Jan to get a free hand on the king side with the f-pawn advance with f4. He really needed that bishop on a2 to shut down, so he did take this big but committal decision, which of course now he has to handle the consequences of, picks up the knight on e6, and expecting the knight to fall back on e3, start putting pressure on c4. Bishop h6 was an idea that we were looking at, but Fabi, the other move of just bringing the rook to defend that c4 pawn, one has to remember that it's not just the c4 pawn that's tender, but also the d6 pawn. And for Jan, it's just simple moves. Bring that rook, the a rook, to the d file, start targeting the d6 pawn. And they will have to take care of not just one, but two weaknesses in this position. Is this already the kind of middle game where Jan perhaps feels that now he's playing for two results?
I think he certainly realizes his position is safe and also playing for an objective advantage, potentially. So, yeah, in that sense, definitely two results. But as Robert pointed out as well, there is some long-term potential for black. If white just waits around, let's say knight to e3, queen to c7, and White starts making silly moves that will never happen, like king to h1, rook a to d8, and I don't know, rook a to c1. Obviously, something like that will never happen. Then black will get the d5 push. Yeah, some completely meaningless moves like, or maybe rook a to d8 especially. Yeah, and then if black gets d5 in the position, then yeah, black should be doing fine at the very least. So he does play knight to e3. I think the most natural move here is queen c7, and the reason why is because other moves allow that rook d1, and then it's difficult to defend d6. But here, if rook d1, rook a d8 is at least a very natural way of defending that.
Is there a problem on c4? Like, there's some variations you won't be able to bring another defender. So, for example, if I take and play queen b4, maybe is that an option?
Queen e2, queen c3. There's a lot of ways of doing it. Yeah.
I'm just keeping in contact with d6, so your d8 rook can't go to c8. You'll lose d6, and now I feel like you're overwhelmed on d6 and c4.
This looks pretty lousy for black indeed. Maybe you still have rook to b8 and try to, in the complications, get to some endgame, which is bad but not lost. Although rook b2, bishop c4, knight c4, or rook a6. Rook a6
Yeah.
also.
Can't be too bad, right?
Definitely can't be bad, but why is the engine not liking this? Rook a2, rook a5, and c3, is that kind of like the c pawn remains rather powerful, maybe because rook c5, rook takes a3. And if I get bishop h6 in, I can fight for that passed c pawn, but hard to say, you know, it looks ugly, especially actually rook c5, rook a3, knight d1 just picks up that c pawn, maybe is completely terrible for black. Could easily
Bobby,
be. So
you're gonna like this. Is it bishop h6, knight c4, rook c2, knight takes e5, rook takes f2?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
that's the reason.
Nice.
Yeah.
And it might actually, is it a draw with rook a8, rook a7? Is that what? Because rook takes f2 is just checkmate.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's
Check,
it's
check,
rook c1
mate.
and yeah, 2 checks and then checkmate. So maybe white has to bail out already with rook a7, rook a8, king g7, rook a7,
And make a draw that
Yeah.
way.
very nice spot there. Yeah, this is a draw. So instead, he did play bishop to h6.
Mm-hmm. And rook
And
d1
rook a to
played
d1, yeah.
instantly.
Well, he was calculating this when he took on e6, certainly. So this is exactly what we kind of instantly felt was a natural direction when he played c4. White is threatening dc4. The d6 pawn is a weakness. And Ding is in thought. So this is now, it's just a calculation position. For example, do you have a move like queen to b6? I think you don't because of knight takes c4. So these kinds of, or it's not so simple in fact.
I'm showing that though. Knight takes c4 out of nowhere, Fabi. It's saying I kept saying earlier, right? Just because there's a more valuable piece behind the knight does not mean it can't move. You take my queen, I take your queen, I win at least a pawn, probably more than that. And so how does black even respond here?
It's still b takes c4, queen h6, queen b2 is the variation is continuing. Bishop takes c4 is probably the best move. Take on c4 is absolutely forced. Pawn takes, and black has queen takes a3, but then rook to d3 and rook to h3. I don't know what this is, but queen a3, I think black is not maybe in such bad shape because obviously there's a lot of trumps in black's position as well. I mean, the passed a pawn. So rook h3 is met by, for example, rook to a7. So it's not a very devastating attack. White has some kind of h4 ideas instead of rook h3 to, you know, just like go all in, just bust it all open, and who knows? But I think that objectively, black is probably holding on in these positions. So will we see queen b6? It's one of the directions Ding will calculate, undoubtedly.
Queen b6 you're pointing at, and I want to ask, because very often when we're faced with this problem of so much pressure, the move that comes to mind is to try to ease it out with trades. And what if Ding decides to actually immediately not go for these complications to try to keep things a little peaceful and picks up the knight on e3? Should Yan consider taking it with the f pawn, or would you pick it up with the queen?
I would consider both. My instinctive reaction is, of course, take with the queen, keep the structure intact, but would certainly consider fe3, not so much because of the f file, but more because I want to keep an eye on the knight on a5. And also, there's another reason. So let's say black plays some move like queen to b6. I'm thinking an idea is to play b4, take, take with the pawn. And now if knight c6, white plays b4 again, and the d4 square is covered, so that e pawn actually is a very useful defender, because if the pawn was on f2, knight d4, I think black is doing beautifully here, because the knight defends e6 and is an outpost. But here, black is left with the knight. Like, where does that knight go? It's actually a bad piece in this position, and e6 is a weakness. So, yeah, f takes e3, definitely consideration. But taking on e3, I can't imagine this move being played. It looks so ugly and like such a concession, a positional concession for black.
Yeah, unless absolutely forced, you never want to give up that bishop so easily and voluntarily. Because white still maintains all the trumps, puts the pressure, and you're left with this knight on a5. The bishop on h6 is an active piece. So while it might look like you're easing the pressure with trades, it's not one that you want. And very often, one of the things that was taught to me when I started playing chess, that when you're looking at trades and trying to decide whether to go for them or not, is to look at what pieces you're actually left with on the board and to try to compare that. And we can see that if the bishop and the knight on e3 are in fact taken off, that knight on a5, it is on the edge of the board. It doesn't look like one that has a very bright future. Meanwhile, the bishop on a2 with clear targets on the long diagonal. And so bishop e3 is not going to be an option. Big question to Ding, how he's fighting towards defending that d6 pawn. We were looking at lines that perhaps could lead to opening up of files for the rooks. Is that an idea that actually Ding can use to counterattack white's pawns, just preempting this trade on c4 before the d6 pawn is hit? And I'm looking at a move that we were thinking about in a different variation, but let's say sliding up with that a8 rook, either c8, but I like the move rook b8 more. I'm x-raying down the b file, and my idea is that if you go for the d6 pawn, I will hit the soft spot on b2. Is there a way that Ding can also look for counterplay on these open files and just play a little prophylactic at this moment?
I think that's a transpositive, at the very least, the exact line we were talking about. Because if rook to b8, then here, if you take on c4 and you take back and queen takes d6 and we get to this position, already there it looked like there are some issues for white to solve. First of all, black could just take on e3, trade some pieces, take on b2 at the end. There's no way black is worse at the end of this line because this bishop is terrible. And even if you get the knight on a5, I can take, you can take, I can take, and black is not losing this endgame with some of the worst pawns you've ever seen. I mean, double isolated pawns all in a row. That's not a connect four where you win the game. So I think that this kind of line with rook b8 is definitely a good option, a viable option to go after b2. And because of how forcing these continuations are, and for example, the line I just put on the board, then I think that white would be best just to sidestep. Get out of the pin. Go queen e2. Put more pressure on the c4 pawn. Now the knight can move. Maybe at some point knight g4 just to kick the bishop back will be valuable. But with the pressure against these pawns, I feel like it's smart for Jan to keep the position closed and not allow Ding just calculate his way out.
Yeah, I like rook to b8. It didn't come to mind immediately as a move I was considering, but now that I've seen it, it looks very, very interesting. And it stops the idea of d takes c4, or at least maybe not stops, but prepares against it for sure. So it's a very logical move from that sense, because without that idea, yeah, white can play queen to e2 perhaps, but yeah, it would make sense. I was actually thinking queen to c7 is also a very logical move, and there was an idea behind this, which was if d takes c4, I like the idea to take on e3, as you mentioned, Tanya. Now it's a better version, I think, because f takes e3 is definitely a concession, so queen takes e3 looks like the most dangerous move. And now I take on c4 with the knight. And if bishop takes, then pawn takes. I think black is close to equality. Engine not agreeing with me, as is usually the case. But it certainly looks like a playable position for black to the naked eye, because black will play rook to b8 and get some counterplay against b2. So we see a lot of the same themes arising. Rook b8, queen c7, bishop b3, just in different positions and different move orders.
I'm totally baffled by this engine evaluation that we're seeing in this current position, because it does look like black would have solved all problems with these trades right now, Fabi. but it shows that white can still put pressure. And I think it comes down to these weak pawns and white just targeting them immediately with doubling up on the d file. But it does look like to the naked eye that black should be indeed fine here. So Ding navigating all these possibilities, once again taking his time during the opening phase, just out of his very familiar martial setups. And the one thing that I was thinking about has been what we've been witnessing during the press conferences. Ding has been so candid about the openings, how he's felt out of preparation at times, especially about game 10 when he mentioned that bishop c5 and it wasn't something that he had looked at, the team had looked at, which to me felt like a very big admission in a world championship match. You're kind of giving away how much you're looking at. Fabi, what's your take on it? Though it's been very candid from Ding and it's been amazing as a fan to see those thoughts, but in a world championship match, is it better to give away less?
Well, it's usually players do tend to keep it pretty close to the chest, and they might make a lot of jokes. They might, like we see Jan is often making some jokes in the press conferences, and I think Magnus was also sometimes like using humor to try to evade very direct questions about preparation or about let's say your strategy for the match. And while Dink has just been straight up very honest and straightforward, not I mean I think players are generally pretty honest, but they might try to like hide things a bit. So Ding has been like very straightforward with what he's saying, and yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily bad because it's more about your inner psychology. It's not so much about what you're like showing to the outside world. So if you're showing vulnerability to the outside world, it's not going to make your opponent stronger. I don't think it's only a question of uh, how are you feeling inwardly, and if it works for Ding, if it doesn't affect him negatively, then I don't see a big issue with it. Some people might point to it as uh, some sort of like they're making some psychological analysis that it shows weakness or something like that, but um, I don't like necessarily buy into the accuracy of people's psychological analysis. I think uh, it's it's not like let's say some professionals are necessarily talking about this. It's very often the random talking of Twitter and so on. So it's I don't think that we should read too much into yeah what Ding is saying. I think it's just honesty, it's straightforwardness. There's nothing necessarily bad or weak about it. And okay, it looks like he's getting ready to make a move. I see like his body posture, his hand is sort of ready to go forwards. Uh, Again, body language is not something I think I'm qualified to speak on, but it really feels like he was ready to make a move there.
Yeah, it does feel like a move is about to come. Well, it is. Ding needs to be careful right now. He has a big decision to make at this moment. Does he snap up that knight on e3 or keep things defended by bringing his queen to b6, eyeing that b2 pawn, or perhaps a rook trade? And while Ding has a think and we wait for him to make a move, let's take a look back. This is actually the fourth game that Ding has faced in the Royal Lopez with the black pieces, starting from game one, where Yan made that interesting decision of taking on c6 the knight. It ended in a draw, but Yan was the one who was pressing there. Game five saw, in fact, a win for Yan in the Royal Lopez. And then game nine was a draw where we saw the anti Berlin idea of bishop c5. And now in game 11, Ding returns with an attempt at the marshal, countered by the anti-marshal by Jan Nepomniachtchi. And currently, the move that we have on the board is in fact one that we were looking at. So Ding does go for the idea of creating his own counterplay in case of trades in the center, in case the pawn is snapped up. And this is just a way of getting ready for the future by black. What you want to do is that you're saying, yes, I know what you want. I'm going to place my pieces in an optimal point for when you go for your plan, is what he's saying to white here. If white snaps up on c4 after taking with the knight the trades on c4, perhaps you start with the pawn trade on c4, you open up the b line and snap up the pawn on b2. Fabi, you said the more you look at this move, the more sense it makes. You approve of this one?
Yeah, I think you called it, and then we saw it right after, and it's a logical move when you consider it. Ding saw d takes c4 is a threat, so I'm preparing against that threat. It takes a lot of the sting out of d takes c4, and maybe we'll see Robert's move queen to e2 here. I think it's super logical. It's not the only move. I mean, there's definitely a wide choice for Jan to consider here, but we also do usually see that when given a wide choice, Jan takes the intuitive, practical approach. So queen to e2 is definitely coming to mind as the kind of intuitive move, right? But he will sit on that comfy chair and consider things from the rest area for a little bit.
Yeah, he has the comfort of his lovely rest area. He just takes a drink of water. He's sitting on the chairs there. Ding Liren also in his rest area. But I don't think that this position is one where Ding can take too much rest, because this bishop that is pinning the knight will have to take the knight is a big question. And that doesn't solve all of Black's problems. It does relieve some of the tension. This pawn on c4 will be guarded more if that knight on e3, one of the attackers, is off the board. But that's an important bishop protecting the king. With a queen landing on e3, eventually there could be some other problems for Black to solve. And let's not forget that this pawn on c4, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. It may be defended, but you can't really afford to ever take on d3 because e6 will be weak behind it. So I just feel like Black can be a bit stuck. And at some point, White could even throw this pawn forward to d4 to go after this pawn on d6 or try to open up the d file. White is better situated along that line. I really am preferring Jan's position here. I don't really see the active counterplay that would be required for me to believe in Black's chances here. Feels like a pretty one-sided affair.
Yeah, and Robert, this moment for Jan where he needs to decide whether he sidesteps with the queen or goes for the idea that you've been talking about. We see that Jan is still not at his chair. We've got empty chairs in front of us. The players are in the rest area. Jan Nepomniachtchi, he currently looks like he's got no intentions of actually stepping back. He's looking at the position from the comforts of his room. Fabi, I have to ask you at this moment that if there is such a scenario where you've got these live boards in front of you and there is this position out of the opening, well, nothing direct is happening. You as a player, would you prefer to be seated in front of the board or take a look at it from the comforts of the rest area, just away from the eyes of, well, the spectators in the world?
Yeah, I would probably prefer to be at the board. That's just how I concentrate best. But I think it's different for everyone, and I think if I were to make any sort of analysis of this, I would be taking armchair psychologist to a whole new level. So yeah, I would probably be at the board personally, but for sure he could be thinking in the rest area and still concentrating on the position. And the thing which worries me a little bit about Black's position is so we've been looking at like concrete ways in which Black gets in trouble, and probably Black is avoiding that. So he's not like going to lose material on the spot or anything. But I just realized, let's say queen e2 here, and queen to c7, it looks like a very logical move to me. With idea d takes c4, bishop takes c3 will not drop a pawn for Black.
Okay, queen 2, queen c7, yep.
And then I was starting to think, what if White just plays a move like h4? Similar to what we saw in the other game. Like I don't need any sort of concrete winning a pawn, because I have the idea of your king side is a bit loosened because the pawn from f7 went to e6. That means that g6 is a bit more tender than usual. So if White gets ideas like h5 or even g3, king g2, just like slow, and then knight g4 and rook h1 and h5, things like that, I'm also worried long term, not just in terms of the short term, am I dropping the c4 or the d6 pawn, but also the long term. What's Black's counterplay, as you said? Not really clear. And the knight on a5 just can't get back into the game because it's tied to defensive c4. The c4 pawn can't trade on d3 because it needs to cover the bishop takes e6 threat. And bishop, I don't think, solves Black's problems because a queen takes e3 or even fe3. We mentioned that as an option. And the same positional question remains: what's your next move? And unless you're getting d5 in, which seems really difficult for Black because it just opens up the position and creates all these weaknesses, I'm not seeing Black's like very immediate plan, which means that White's idea, slow though it may be, can be dangerous. h4, h5, or even g3, king g2, and just a slow kingside aggression.
Yeah, Fabi, I was thinking about a line earlier that, let's say after queen e2, Black decided to take this knight, and play queen b6. If you trade queens, I just want to show what that looks like. You'll see the evaluation bar, I think, go at least towards level. Black may even be slightly preferred in some of these positions because you've solved pretty much all your problems. This king will happily go to f7 and to e7. Your king can walk towards the center of the board without queens on. That king will be safe there and protect the weaknesses in black's camp, which will open up many more possibilities. So instead of trading queens, I was thinking the white queen slides to h3. Now there's pressure on this pawn. How do you even defend this pawn? You play rook to e8. I was actually thinking about variations where white plays this b4 push. I don't think I can get away with it right now, but what if I take and play b4? You brought this idea to my attention earlier, Bobby, and the engine approves of it, that if you take, I can take back, and I'm going to play b4, and I'm going to go after this pawn, and you can't even play knight c6 because d6 is weak. So all of your pawns are hanging, and you can't even take this one because rook b1 pins and wins this knight as the queen is behind it. So I just feel like black's position could fall apart at any moment if you're not super careful.
Yeah, I think b4 is always an idea to watch out for. And especially here, like if black's knight could get to d4, as you mentioned, knight c6 with idea of knight d4, then it would be all okay for black. Knight on d4 covers everything beautifully. But knight c6 allows rook takes d6. The knight is simply not in time, and we have to recognize that this knight, although it does perform a useful function on a5 in terms of defending c4, it is, ultimately a bad piece, and it struggles to get into the game. It's at the moment just a defensive piece, and when the position opens up, it will need to get into the game, but the question then will be, can it do so? And in the line you mentioned, it just doesn't manage. I think that's why probably after dc4, knight takes c4 would be a necessary move in that line that we just saw. And maybe knight takes c4 is holding it all together quite decently, but of course, in all these variations, white is the one with the initiative, with the pressure, so pretty comfortable situation for white. On the other hand, we don't see the eval being tremendous, so Ding is not yet in trouble, but he's under pressure, and unfortunately for him in the match situation, a position where you're playing just trying to get a draw without any real prospects of winning is not really what he wanted to be on the menu today.
Yeah, but as long as he's able to hold today, that would be the dream with the black pieces right now. And let's just remind everyone that at this moment, for Ding Liren, if he was to lose a game, that would be essentially World Championship over. Yan would be 2 points ahead, an impossible deficit to cover with just such few games remaining. So it's very important for Ding. More important than creating chances is to make sure that he's able to keep things under control and make sure that he has enough resources, even if it means defending a bad position, defending a passive position, that he has enough resources to make that happen. He's made the move rook to b8, and we see Yan returning to his chair. And while Yan will have a think on how to counter and go about these ideas that Robert and Fabi have been looking at, will we see a queen move? Will we see a trade on c4? Well, we will be back after this short break as Nepomniachtchi just goes into a think.
Introducing WorldQuant, the partner of the Champions Chess Tour and Chess.com. WorldQuant is a global firm in the field of quantitative asset management. If you don't know what that is, it's the job of building complex mathematical models that seek to identify market inefficiency. For 2023, WorldQuant Brain is bringing together its International Quant Championship and the award-winning Champions Chess Tour to hunt down the next generation of quant finance specialists.
It sounds very exciting. You put your skills in practice in a case competition where you get a real challenge. And I signed up.
WorldQuant is seeking new talent and new energy, and it's looking at the world of chess to help. Because nobody knows how to analyze a position better than a chess player, right? No quant experience? No problem. So, do you think you have what it takes to compete in the International Quant Championship? Sign up and be the next quant champion.
Dingler, and we see there has made a move. He decides to recapture there, contemplating about this decision. It is a move 19, and we see that he is behind on the clock, but the position does seem to be simplifying. Jan Nepomniachtchi took the decision to trade that pawn on c4 immediately. A little bit of a surprise, simply because he did have the option to delay that decision a little bit, to take that pawn at a more critical moment when perhaps his queen on d2 was not pinned. And Ding immediately comes back and responds in a couple of minutes by recapturing with the knight, taking advantage of the pin along the 8-6 e1 diagonal. Nepo, we've got a few moves coming up. Nepo takes on c4. Well, it was the only way to go forward, and we see Fabi, Robert, B line has opened up. It just looks to my eye that these trades definitely favor Ding, and whatever chances that we were talking about, the dangers in the position with the pawn structure, with this activity along the B line, with that really nice bishop placed on h6, always ready to trade the e3 knight. It looks like Ding will not have too much trouble anymore. Things are definitely in control for Black here. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think Robert, you called it right before the game started. This is the D word. We're heading for a draw.
You know,
And
there's no reason to look. He's trading everything off. He had a slightly better position. He could have played on, but what he is doing is he's simplifying. The queens are about to come off. The bishop is going to take the knight. The rook is going to take the rook. And then at the end of the day, white is just going to take a bunch of pawns. Black is also going to take a bunch of pawns. And this is completely balanced in the endgame.
yeah, we're heading most likely, I would say, like 98% draw. What will happen is queen d6, rook d6, and bishop e3, f e3. There's a lot of pieces on the board, but they're going to be traded off one by one. Rook f1, king f1 will happen, rook takes b2 will happen. White will capture, I don't know, maybe let's say a6 first, rook c2, and then rook e6. And black can play rook to a2, maybe. And rook e5, rook a3. Maybe even c3 was playable, but
I was
yeah,
gonna say, can you start getting tricky with pushing the c3 c pawn, Robert, before capturing on a3? You gotta watch out, because if you go rook c5, then I think c2 wins for black.
well, king e1 still holds it together.
Oh, king e1, yes.
But we still see a draw here, and like everything is going to get blitzed out at this moment. This is pretty. Yeah, we're seeing this all happen on the board.
Yeah, they're blitzing their moves out. Lots of trades. To me, it looks like that capture on c4 was essentially a draw offer by Nepo. He's saying, I'm happy to not push too much in the game, simply because I'm up a point in this match. We get closer to the finish line, and the ball is in Ding's court to try to create his chances for a win. It's not going to happen in this game. As we can see, all the trades, the position that you were calling out is on the board, rook b2, and we don't feel that either of the sides is going to push this ending too much. It's hard to see chances anywhere here.
No, I mean, there's just nothing available for black, to be sure. And for white, I think the best that you can hope for is a pawn up endgame, but with the pawns on the same side of the board, that should be still well within the realm of a draw. And so for Ding Liren, you take all the small victories you can get. It may not be a win to level up the match, but a draw with the black pieces without sweating too much right before the rest day, I feel like that's not the worst thing in the world. But the key thing I just said there is rest day. I think for Jan Nepomniachtchi, he is going to use that rest day well. His team is going to be looking through all the openings. If what we saw a day ago happens after the rest day, great preparation from Team Nepomniachtchi. He really didn't find himself in any difficulties because he knew the line so much better. So I think that Jan is conserving energy, he's conserving his lead on the scoreboard, and he does not mind a draw that's about to ensue.
It is a 14-game match, and it's been such a big fight for both these players, from the black pieces, from the white pieces. We've seen intense struggles. We've seen long marathon games. And Fabi, do you think that's also playing out a little bit, that the players are perhaps running out of steam here?
I think certainly, and that's not something they can be blamed for, because yeah, this is a very long, very tough match with more decisive games at the start and in the middle of it than we've seen in a long time in a World Championship match. Maybe going back to like 2006 or 2008, Kramnik Topalov or Kramnik Anand. These matches, which had a lot of decisive games too, but at some point, especially 14-game match, you're expecting players to get a bit fatigued, and I think this decision that Jan made to play d takes c4 instead of queen e2, we can of course say queen e2. It's not like it necessarily leads to something huge for white, but it's a way to keep pressure on the position. And early on in the match, Jan plays queen e2. I'm pretty certain that he would not immediately trade off all the pieces, basically sacrifice his white game. Uh, it's because he's probably a bit tired. He's preserving energy, and also because he has a lead in the match. I think if the score was reversed, Ding is up a game. There is not a single world in which Jan would ever take on c4 down in the match. He would play queen e2. He would press this position until there's absolutely nothing left, not even a single chance remaining to win the game. Instead, he just goes for a drawn position. I think this is indicative of the match score and the match situation in terms of both players being, well, especially in this case, Jan is the only one who really had a chance to deviate. The players being a little bit fatigued, and Jan probably being perfectly happy to take that rest day, go into the 3 remaining games up a point, 2 blacks. So of course, it's not like Ding won't have his fair share of chances. Certainly, he will in the remaining 3 games, but still, Jan is in a good position.
Feels like a small victory for both of them, right? With this ending of this game and the way it's gone. For Jan, he keeps his 1 point victory, a 1 point lead with just 3 games remaining. And for Ding, on the other hand, a survival with black without having to sweat it too much. Definitely the energy is required, and he can focus on his game with the white pieces. And Fabi, in a 14-game match, it feels as if the weight of each of these games is very different. And the closer we get to the finish line, the closer we can see that the match is about to end, the pressure rises in each of these games, even if it's a level match, which was the case in yours and Magnus's World Championship. Is it true that as the match gets closer to the finish line, the tension rises, what's at stake feels a lot more, and this might impact decisions?
Yeah, certainly what's at stake. I mean, each game becomes more critical because we come to the point where a loss you might not be able to recover from, especially in Dig's position, right? He already been down the match. But, if we're going into the last game, then like my last game against Magnus, he certainly could have played on. He had a much better position, the final position, but he didn't want to take that risk, even if it was a very minimal risk that things go wrong and you can't recover from a loss. So he decided to take the decision to basically just make a draw instead. And yeah, players might tend to rock up a bit at the end of the match, especially if they're in the lead. That's totally normal. I think also Jan made a general correction in his play in terms of uh, like super practicality, because we know that for a long time, Jan, as strong as he was, suffered a bit from moments of weakness, which just really shouldn't happen and impacted his results very negatively. For example, going all out for a win in certain positions, or just making blunders that are uncharacteristic of him because he was rushing decisions. And now we see a player who's basically a super practical professional. We saw that in the candidates. We see that in this match as well. Now he's taking very, very practical decisions, trying to keep the game controlled at any cost, pretty much. I think Ding is happy because, well, we see with the speed that he's making these moves, it almost seems like he's excited that he was able to defend a slightly worse position without any sort of suffering. He's so confidently making these moves now. It feels like he's happy that Jan took on c4. But yeah, this game is headed for a draw, and the players are now blitzing out the final moves. Although it looks like Jan is still going to keep a pawn advantage.
Are you? Because e3 falls as well?
But king
And
f2
and
and
you'll.
rook c5, and then the king runs to h3, and we get a drawn position where white is a pawn up. So, for
Oh,
example,
wow.
king f2. Black is not obligated to take on e3, but let's say he does. King f2, rook to a3, rook to c5. Pawn can't be defended, so some checks. King g3, rook. Yeah, king f3, rook a3, king g4, rook a2, king h3. Only place to hide, I guess. g3, and let's say I actually like the idea of tying the king to h3 by playing rook a2. rook
I
takes
was
c5.
I was gonna do the same thing. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, same idea, and white's king is completely tied to defense. And for example, rook e7 cutting the king off, black can play, I think, h6. Very nice little move, preparing king f8. And the king cannot advance. So e5, I guess. I don't know what else. King f8, rook e6, king f7, or rook h6. Yeah, you can play 2 against 1 again, which we might see. King g7, rook e6, king f7. Yeah, this kind of thing is very likely. I think he'll take on e3, and we'll see this sort of endgame happen, which is, basically just a draw.
Yep, looks pretty forced. I don't really see many alternatives here. I guess black could try to keep this pawn, saying your 2 pawns are as good as my 1, but this line is very forcing. What we went down, there isn't much in terms of deviation for Jan Nepomniachtchi, so I think Ding Liren just working it out to its conclusion, and they'll play the forcing draw.
Yeah, the reason
It's
I don't
amazing.
like. Oh, sorry, Tanya.
I was gonna say it's amazing that you found this idea where actually Yan can still be up a pawn, that the e5 pawn falls, but at the end of it, with the king pursuing white's rook on e5 and that weakness on e4, it looks like it might not be a pawn that's gonna survive too long. And also, there is a 40 move no draw for rule here, so the players still have to find a way to continue playing, and they can't offer a draw. So either repetition or just keep on liquidating the position, but it looks like it's likely headed towards the liquidation, and we might be seeing a 2 versus 1 on the king side. And Fabi, really nice idea, because the first thought was that it's an immediate draw, it's an immediate end, that black just picks up the e3 pawn and the material's equal. But it's not as it meets the eye, and that's always the case with chess. It's just not over till it's over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna make a prediction: another king versus king, bear kings end to this game. Because yeah, they can't offer a draw. I don't think that they're going to repeat, because white is still up a pawn, so maybe they'll just go all the way to the finish line.
Nice. Well, Fabi, because you're in the mood for making predictions, I'm going to use this as my opportunity to ask you to make a harder prediction than the one that you just did. And Robert, I want you in on this, and chat as well. And my question is, and I'm going to start with Robert on this one: will we see a tiebreak in this World Championship match? What's your prediction?
Wow. So since you're asking me, do I think Jan Nepomniachtchi will lose a game and one in the final 3? I think the odds are heavily in Jan's favor. I know 2 whites in the last 3 games for Ding Liren, great opportunities for him. But the way Jan has been playing, I mean, he really seems to have that fortitude necessary to convert this lead in the match into a World Championship title. So I'm going to say that we will not see tiebreaks. I do think Jan Nepomniachtchi, with his lead, I think he'll be able to keep it. But now that I say that, watch Ding Liren win the next game.
And we might be just seeing a repetition here, or Yan might decide to step up with the king, and we might anyway see the game end in a draw. Fabi, your turn. Robert says that Yan has, of course, the 1-point lead, and he believes and he expects Yan to take it through with that. What about you, Fabi?
Well, last World Championship match, we had this prediction contest. I'm not even sure who ended up winning that prediction contest. But at some point, because we didn't want to, keep predicting draws or like predict the kind of obvious results, we were sort of making some wild predictions, like Jan is going to win with black against Magnus, and which is, of course, is not a very likely thing in a single game. So even though the odds are definitely in Jan's favor that he wins without needing a playoff, yeah, let's predict a playoff. Let's go for it.
I wonder what chat has to say. I'm gonna go with Fabi on this one. I would love to see this match go down to the wire, simply because we've seen such fighting chess from both of them. Ding Liren has a tough task for that. He has to win one of the next 3 games. Of course, the odds are stacked against him, but we've seen Ding, when it matters, he's managed to strike back in the match. Can he do it one more time? Would love to see this go down to the wire. Would love a playoff in this, Robert. But right now, that task is a monumental one for Ding. It's not going to be easy getting there.
Yeah, I think every fan of the game, except for Jan Nepomniachtchi fans, would like to see a tiebreak. That's always a lot of fun. But yeah, just the way Jan has been playing. I mean, yesterday's game, more so, this game is, to me, is kind of a nothing game. Jan is just coasting with this one. As Fabi was saying, if this were earlier in the match, he would not have traded all the pieces off. He would have tried to work that advantage. But look at him. He's sipping on his tea. He's enjoying himself. He's like, I have a lead. What do I have to worry about? My preparation with Black yesterday was stellar. And he doesn't have just preparation for this match. Let's not forget, he has a ton of preparation, a treasure trove of preparation from the candidates, 2 of them that he won from the World Championship in 2021 against Magnus. Fabi, let me ask you this. How long did you have leftover preparation for?
I think only a few months. Only a few months. Right after that, right after the match, I played in London, and I was able to use some of the prep that we had against Levon. I played a match against Levon, and the prep was actually kind of really important for winning that match against Levon, because I used one idea with White against the Berlin, which ended up winning a rapid game, and I used some prep with Black twice to make comfortable draws with the Black pieces against him. So yeah, immediately after the prep was extremely valuable, and then I played a match against Hari Krishna in February, rapid and blitz match, and a lot of the prep there was used, a lot of the Petrov prep, and that was also very important for that match against Hari. So, but then after that, it eventually became kind of dissipated. Like, I showed most of my ideas. Chess evolves very quickly, so I would say 3-4 months after that, it was basically equal footing with the other guys. But I would say these days, if you prepare for a World Championship match, because technology has increased so much, and you can quickly find so many ideas that if you're given like months and months to prepare, you can really uncover a lot of very interesting stuff that it might last longer. And after his first World Championship match against Magnus, I feel like Jan was very well prepared for like the Rapid and Blitz tournaments that he played. For the next candidates, a lot of that Petrov prep, it was like very important that he had a pretty unshakable repertoire with the Black pieces. So hard to say. I think that after this match, for sure, Jan will continue to show very good results because of his extremely good prep as well, and Ding as well. I think will have plenty of ideas and continue to show very good results.
He's shown some incredible ideas in this match itself, and his ability to sort of agree to play them and to go for a new idea every day with pieces, every game with the Black pieces, has been quite incredible to watch. But there has been this feeling that has it been in depth? Has that preparation been in depth, or is it a trade-off that the more ideas you have, the more difficult it is to sort of fight against and know every single alternative that your opponent might have? And this one, well, it seems like it's been a flawless game by Dingleren with the Black pieces, just making sure that everything was under control. Jan Nepomniachtchi perhaps would have made more of his chances after that committal move of c4, but given the match situation, has decided to go into this endgame, which should end in a draw. And the position that we have in front of us, king to h3, has been played. Jan gets up, leaves the board. Dingleren is trying to think what is the most efficient way to end this game as quickly as possible, to give the least amount of chances to Jan right now. And the one thing that comes to my mind here is it time to already start marching up with that king? We were looking at continuing to give checks and allowing White to step up with that g3 pawn. But can Ding actually force matters here with a move like king f7 and try to go king to f6 if you grab the e5 pawn?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a viable way of playing, and I think Ding is just thinking about the most accurate way to make a draw here. But there's I think probably the only losing moves are rook a5 and rook takes g2, and everything else, even silly moves, or rook c2. I forgot about that one, as Robert pointed out, and even a silly move like rook to a8. Maybe g5 is also on the verge. Yeah, no, g5 rook e5 is probably pretty fine after h6 anyway. But you don't want to play g5, right? I mean, that would be a risky endeavor for sure.
So we're at the point where we're talking about the only moves that are possible to lose this game, which means that Dingleren will pretty confidently hold the draw. But I actually like that he's slowed down. He did this couple games ago when he had the black pieces, when he knew he could make a draw, he gave up a pawn, so it was rook knight and 2 against rook knight and 3. And he actually said in the post-mortem, right, when he was talking about some of the analysis, oh, I could have lost if I made this move. So he is trying to be very precise. He understands that this is a draw, but why should he rush? He's an hour plus on his clock. The best thing he can do is make the draw. How much time he has left remaining is irrelevant. So I think that he is doing something that is very educational for everybody at home who thinks, oh, I have a draw in the bag, let me just make moves. You should be certain at this point, and Dingley Ren can probably visualize this to its conclusion. So I think as he makes the move, rook to e2, it's just like the lines we were talking about earlier. He's going to go after this e-pawn. The white king is very far away and won't be able to get back into the game very easily. So I think this is just simple territory for Dingley Ren, who will bring his king up to f6.
Yeah, I think that this is just very direct. Like rook takes e5, king to f7, just trying to get that e-pawn back as soon as possible. And king to g3 after that, most likely. Okay, we'll probably see these moves blitzed out. King f7, king g3, king f6, rook e8, king f8. And
yeah, we might just see it.
Yeah, we'll probably just see all this.
King f7 played. And now white, you're saying, will start stepping up towards the center. Are the players already thinking about the rest day and the next game in their heads?
Yeah, they both know this is a draw. But they know that white will get 2 against 1.
And will Yan return the favor by just sacrificing the last pawn and then going in a king versus king? Fabi, you predicted that this game will end with a king versus king position.
They could also repeat it. It's kind of 50-50 at this point if they'll try to find the way to a king against king or if they'll just make a repetition. Because after
Which do you prefer? As someone who makes draws at the high level, do you prefer going to bare kings or to the 3-time repetition?
I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and it feels like a really perfect way to end the game. Oh, okay, repetition immediately. No rook to h. Rook to h8 would have won that h7 pawn, but none of that. So just a draw.
Yeah, there we see king to f7, and he comes back with the rook to e5. That's a 3rd-time repetition. We will see the players call out for an arbiter to check that, as it's not allowed to offer a draw in this position. So the arbiter would usually come and ensure that in fact the position has been repeated thrice. A little awkward pause there between Yan and Ding as they wait for the arbiter to arrive. The game has ended in a draw.
They have
or at
to
least
ask
will be
for
in a few seconds.
It's funny they have to ask for permission to make a draw when they're very obviously in a position that is a drawn. And yeah, there's the handshake. It is a split point, which means Jan Nepomniachtchi keeps his 1-point advantage in this match.
It does. And it also means, Robert, that Dingley Ren has only 3 games to strike back now, but he will get 2 whites out of those 3 games. He has to maximize his chances. And look at that. We see the players sign off the chessboard. That's fun. That's interesting. I would love to get one of the World Championship chessboards with the signatures of the players on it. Super cool stuff there. Well, both these players have got something to be happy about with the outcome of today's game. Dingley Ren maintains his striking distance trailing point, while Jan Nepomniachtchi, with just 3 games left, inches towards well, at least makes 1 step closer towards that World Championship title. And now Dingley Ren will start the next game with the white pieces. We see the kings being placed at the right square, which does signal that the game has ended in a draw, and it was quite a peaceful one, Robert.
It certainly was. We saw in opening, instead of the Berlin in the Spanish here, a6 was played. And this is some mainline stuff. Knight comes out to f6, white castles, bishop to e7, and d3, a calm approach. Fabi, I mean, you could take it from here, buddy, but it felt like it was a pretty solid affair from the start, but there was just probably 1 or 2 critical moments.
Yeah, here Ding played b5, bishop to b3, and d6. This was following their 5th game, I believe it was. And here, in the earlier game, Jan had played c3, but instead he played a3 in this move. One of the main lines of the anti-martial. Knight a5, bishop a2, c5. Still following a lot of theory. Knight c3, bishop to e6. And here Jan played bishop g5. As we mentioned, white has other options, but this is following the general strategy of trying to eliminate that knight and take advantage of the d5 square. Short castle happened. Bishop takes f6. Bishop takes f6, knight to d5. White has the d5 square. And here black played g6 to drop the bishop back to g7. Queen d2 is the moment that Ding started to think. And he played bishop to g7. We were discussing if maybe knight c6 was more accurate, but certainly his move cannot be a bad one. Knight to g5 was played. And here's c4. A move which surprised us a little bit. We were looking at other moves, right? But c4 is a very interesting one to block off that bishop on a2. Knight takes e6, fe6, knight to e3. Bishop to h6, pinning that knight to the queen, so the knight cannot move, and c4 is indirectly defended. Rook a to d1, and here an excellent move that Tanya pointed out before and then was quickly played by Ding. Rook to b8. Not a move which comes to mind immediately, but defending against any sort of d takes c4 ideas by preparing the rook on the open file. That would open up after d takes c4. And this is indeed what happened, but maybe this was Jan's chance to push a bit more in the game with the move queen to e2, as we were discussing. White keeps some certain advantage, although not a tremendous one, but definitely something to play for. But Jan went straight for the most concrete approach. D takes c4, knight takes c4, bishop takes c4, b takes c4. All the pieces got traded off very quickly after queen takes d6, take, trading on e3, trading on f1, trading on b2, and very soon it was a rook endgame with neither side having any serious winning chances. White still gaining a pawn, but not enough to win the game, as we saw.
Yeah, and then we ended with a 3-time repetition where we were just joking. Do you prefer bare kings or a 3-time repetition? What's your draw choice? Chat, get involved. Let us know. Would you prefer to make a draw by 3-time repetition or by being king versus king? Or stalemate. Let's throw that in the mix. Let us know. But either way, this game, it didn't have as much life as some of the others. And that's because Jan Nepomniachtchi, in that moment where he could have played queen to e2, he decided, let's just trade all the pieces. Let's liquidate. Let's make that draw. Get ready to rest tomorrow before going into game 12.
Yeah, Nepomniachtchi hasn't lost a single game with the white pieces in this World Championship match so far. He keeps that up today. Not just today. This is his 20-game streak of not losing with the white pieces. And we will be hearing from the players soon as they get ready for the press conference. Today's result, today's game, both these players have got reasons to be pleased with the outcome. But once again, the pressure is on for Ding Liren. Clearly, he has a white coming up in the next game, but one gets the feeling, and tell me guys if you would agree with this, that Ding is definitely very relieved with that move d takes c4 and just how easily, not just the result, but just how little it took out of him to draw today. Well, we will talk more on that, but right now we can see that the players are ready. Let's head over to Astana to hear it from Ding and Jan.
Hello everyone, welcome at the press conference of round 11. Today the game has ended in a draw and the current score is 6-5 in favor of Jan Nepomniachtchi. I would like to ask both the similar question, the same question in fact. First I will go with Ding. The first moves in today's game were similar to the one you played at the Candidates Tournament back in 2020, which was won by Jan Nepomniachtchi. Does this past result influence today's game from a psychological point of view?
Yeah, when he played a3, I recorded game. It was a very bad memory for me. He didn't push very hard to win with this line, but white always maintains some small advantages, and black had to be careful to hold. But today, we played another line in this variation, and I guess my play was much better than last time.
All right, thank you. What about you, Ding? Sorry, Jan. Do you want me to repeat the question, maybe? Or it's okay?
No, not really. I can slightly recall the question. Yeah. I mean, there is this A3, D3, A3. Really, Lopez is always like slight pressure for white, and I guess, yeah, we had this game in Yekaterinburg, yeah, but I think, yeah, today Ding played a different line, yeah, this early 95 C5. I mean, basically all lines are very good against A3, and everywhere white is like have very small pressure. I'm not quite sure I was right to take on C4, because somehow I thought that I will at least get this 3 against 2 rook endgame. But yeah, unfortunately 3 against 2 never happens. So like black has enough time to make sure like it's white won't get an extra pawn. So yeah, probably this was a little bit premature, but anyway I think yeah, black is very solid. So yeah, perhaps should have played it slowly, like I don't know, queen e2 maybe instead of d takes c4. Yeah, so this was perhaps not the best decision, but anyway I don't think it was something very serious for white.
Ding, was there today's game any real chances to spice up a little bit the position and to play for a decisive result? If so, where do you think you could have deviated in order to get more active game?
Well, after knight g5, at that point I played c4, and yes, after c4 he always have the chance to liquidate to the endgame. But instead of c4, if I play anything else, then f4 comes, I will be in danger of getting worse. So I don't think I have so many chances today.
Right, and also I'll just follow up with the next question. There are still 3 games to go, in which you will have 2 whites. Is there anything you will change in your strategy to maximize your chances to get the victory you need?
Of course, I will try my best in the last 3 games. Also, tomorrow will be a rest day. I have more time to prepare some extra idea.
All right, thank you. Jan, do you think that the most difficult part of the match is already behind and now you just have to finish the job, or do you think that the most critical games are still ahead of you?
You gotta be kidding.
Sorry?
You gotta be kidding, no?
I'm not.
I mean, indeed, like it's 3 games, and like I should give it all, yeah, to do the job, let's say so. But of course, like it's nothing like anything like it's over. Obviously not. It's pretty much unclear match, I think.
Okay, thank you. And my last question to Ding. Anyway, do we have questions in the press? I would like to go first with your questions. Yes, please.
Вопрос Яну Непомнящему. Ян, сегодня вот ничья белыми. С одной стороны это ничья, а с другой стороны вы ведете в счете, вы еще на шаг ближе к титулу. Вы довольны вот результатом сегодняшним или нет?
The question to Jan Nepomniachtchi, and the question is that today it's a draw. On the one hand, it's a draw. On the other hand, you're 1 point ahead, and this gets you closer to the end result. Are you satisfied with the result of the game today?
Ну, нельзя сказать, что я доволен ни в коем случае, потому что, мне кажется, позиция была приятнее и, ну, такой был хороший характер борьбы. Ну, вот ДЦ, мне кажется, очень неудачное решение. Я почему-то думал, что все-таки БЦ вместо комбит, ну, там после БЦ есть ход Б4, например, да, то есть там шансы у белых есть, а после комбит С4 просто, ну, все меняется. Вот, но, да, с другой стороны, ну, ничья это в целом приемлемый результат в такой ситуации?
I can't say that I'm fully satisfied with the result of the game. I think that d7 was not the greatest decision. After b4 there are plenty of chances, but knight c4 was also a working decision, and the draw is still a draw that gets me close to the end result. So, thank you.
Do we have more? We have question from Leoncho, please.
Leoncho Garcia from El País. As I don't have too much to write about today's game, I will kindly ask you your help to write about some different topic but connected with, which are the preventive anti-cheating measures taken by FIDE in this World Championship. I have two questions for both of you. The first one is, are you satisfied with those measures, or do you have any suggestion to improve on that sense? And the second question, making clear that I'm not asking you about concrete names, is, do you think that any of the world's top 25 have ever cheated?
Thank you for the question. Jan, we will go first with you.
Thank you for the question. I guess it's a tricky question, especially the second one. So yeah, I guess in the cycle tournaments, like same was I guess in Madrid and in the candidates in the previous match. I guess I mean one wouldn't believe this is possible. Yes, so I mean all the measures are being taken quite seriously, and also you sort of like trust your opponent whom you know so well. But speaking of I don't know, some top players, I mean, you can never be sure, especially when you play online. But
I mean,
yeah.
over the board, mainly. Over the board, mainly.
Over the board, I would hardly believe. But there is always, I mean, there is always someone who speculates about this. Yes. So once again, I guess. It's very difficult to like completely like prevent it. Like so, there would be no like zero chance, yeah, to play unfair. But I hope that you know the risk of you know denunciation is too high for especially for the top players to do this.
Thank you. Ding, what about you?
Well, as we know, there are some cheating cases happen online, but over the board, especially for the tournament I have already played, I don't believe there is some cheating happens at the same time.
Thanks a lot to both of you.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
I have a question to Dean. Dean, you are down 1 point. Did you have any ideas of playing, I don't know, Sicilian or maybe some sharp line to get back to the fight? Because you played e5 today, and maybe it's too calm or maybe it's too early for you to take a lot of risk.
Yeah, still it's, I think it's too early to play something like Sicilian. At that point, still there are 3 games ahead. You know, in candidates, I win on the last game, so anything can happen in the last 3 rounds.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
Ulrich Stock from Die Zeit in Hamburg. A question to both players. Have you heard that 500 meters from here, Hans Niemann is playing in an open tournament? Do you know about that, and what do you think about that?
Jan?
Yeah, actually, I heard there is like a quite a strong open tournament. Yeah, and I think I checked. I checked the starting the list of players, but still I don't get your question. Yeah. No, not really.
What about you, Ding?
Well, actually, I didn't follow the tournament he played. So, which tournament did he play?
There is a side event of the match.
Alongside with
Kazakhstan Cup. That's the event, yes. Okay, it says a lot. Do we have more questions from the press? I don't see any more questions. Okay, please.
Здравствуйте, Ян. Осталось совсем немного партий. И как сегодня говорили, что сегодня будет быстрая ничья. В дальнейшей партии будете форсировать быстрые ничьи или нет?
A question to Jan. There are not too many games left, and today there was a forced draw. Do you intend to have any more forced draws in the upcoming games?
Спасибо за вопрос. Ну, черным я бы точно не отказался от быстрых ничьих. Вот, но сегодня у меня не было такой цели, как там, сделать быструю ничью, просто ну, так. Позиция не совсем правильно распорядился преимуществом, и получилось, что как бы там, все разменялось. В целом я просто стараюсь играть в шахматы.
Thank you for the question. With the black pieces, I definitely wouldn't say no to a forced draw. And today it wasn't my goal to have a quick game with a forced draw. I did not use my advantage in the game, and yeah, I do not intend to get forced draws when I play.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for Twitter segment, and Jesse will bring the questions from the audience, which are asking the questions on Twitter.
Thank you, Katie. My name is Jessie February. My first question is for Ding from Margaret. Could you discuss the general ideas after c4 and the possible imbalances since it took 13 minutes to play this move?
Well, with knight g5, the idea was take on e6 or play f4, then take on e6 and knight takes on f4. So with c4, first I cut his bishop, and yeah, that's basically the whole point behind c4.
Thank you. Next question, please.
The next question is from Amit for both of you. If you were to propose challenges or changes rather to the World Chess Championship match format, what would you suggest? So if you were to change the format of the match, what would you suggest?
Jan, we will go first with you.
Yeah, good question. But for the moment, actually, I don't care.
What about you, Ding?
Well, now I think the tournament can be even longer.
You want to have more rounds?
Yeah, more rounds.
Okay.
Would they be classical rounds or other?
Classical rounds, yeah.
Thank you. Fair enough. Next question, please.
My last question is a little unrelated to the match for Nepo. Are you still following Dota? Do you make time for gaming these days?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, sometimes I follow, but I almost stopped playing, and surely, there is no free time here to play 1 or 2 games here. But yeah, when it's after the match, perhaps I'll play a bit, but yeah, for now it's not the best idea.
There was one more related to Dota. What is your MMR?
Before it was higher than now.
All right, thanks.
Thank you very much. I see that there's no more questions in the press. I don't have more questions as well. Tomorrow will be the rest day for the players. The match will resume on 26th of April. I wish the players to have a good rest day tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Ding wants more classical games, as only 3 remain. Understandable from his perspective. It would mean more opportunities to come back to the match, more opportunities to take bigger risks. Currently, the margin for error, Ding, keeps declining with every single game gone. And 4 back-to-back draws means that Jan Nepomniachtchi ends game 11 with a 1-point lead. He's on 6 points. Jan is 1.5 points away from becoming world champion. Ding's task is cut. He starts game 12 with the white pieces. He will have 2 whites in the final 3 games. He has to maximize his chances he was alluding to using the rest day as perhaps coming up with a new idea. Before we get into that, Fabi, I want to ask you, do you want more classical games in this World Championship match?
If they're not like the game today, then definitely. But I can understand Ding's feelings. Yeah, if you're trailing the match, the only amount of games you want is at least one more chance to get back into the match. And I'm sure we'll see that he'll have some chances. He'll have a rest day now to prepare his opening. I'm sort of out of predictions for what that opening may be because maybe Ding doesn't even know at the moment. Maybe he still needs the rest day to decide on what first move that he wants to play.
Yeah, and for Ding Liren, I mean, of course he wants more games. What does he want to take us back to the Karpov-Kasparov match where Karpov was up 5 games to none, but it was first to 6 wins, and then Kasparov came back, and then finally they had to stop the match because the players lost so much weight and were so exhausted. But of course we understand Ding's perspective, and for Jan, I actually like that he got to answer that Dota question at the end because it did seem to bring him some happiness, some joy, whereas most of the other questions he just shook off, was like, I'm not talking about any of that stuff. I'm just focused on this match. So it's good to see Jan still enjoying things, still enjoying games outside of chess, and he clearly was happy to receive that one question, but probably none of the others.
Do you think he played any Dota during the rest day, Robert?
He said he's got no time for anything but chess here, but he probably will play once this event comes to its close. He hopefully is world champion, from his point of view, when he gets to play Dota next. But no, he's not playing anything but chess during this world championship.
I'm loving these press conferences and these. I'm finding the answers extremely amusing. And the players, I feel that along the way, they've sort of learned how to handle tricky questions. Now, we saw Ding also mention that how he felt that the situation was not desperate enough for excessive risk today, and that he still has 2 whites coming up. But the path to comeback is getting narrow now. With just 3 games, there will be a point, Fabi, where he will have to take maximum risk.
To be honest, I think it's already the next game. Maybe not maximum risk, but he should be viewing that game pretty much as a must-win. Maybe not a complete must-win, but you don't want to let it all ride on that last game, with the white pieces, where we might estimate the chances that someone beats Jan on a specific one game with the white pieces as, maybe 10%. You don't want to have that 10% chance, maybe even less than that, on just one day. So he has 2 chances. I think that each game he should be viewing as 2 chances with the white pieces, 1 with the black pieces, but that's not really a chance you can count on so much. I think every game he should be viewing as any small chance. I need to try to maximize it, and I should be trying to create as many problems for my opponent from the start of the game as possible. I don't envy his position. It's a difficult one, but he may be up to the task.
He did allude to the candidates where, in fact, it was the very last game that he won, defeating Hikaru Nakamura, finished second, and now he is here playing the World Championship match. Robert, do you agree with Fabi here that despite there being 3 games, he needs to maximize his chance in every single one of them, and the time to take risks has indeed arrived?
Oh, for sure, because even that win over Hikaru, I mean, that couldn't have been expected. Hikaru was playing great chess, winning a chess game at the highest level. Sometimes it feels like it's nearly impossible. So I think that Ding Liren, he needs to be better prepared than he was yesterday because he got caught in the opening. He was surprised. He needs to be well prepared and play something combative. At some point, you just have to go all in, and it's maybe not necessarily all in just yet, but it does start to feel that way. I think that Fabi's right, that in the next game, he really needs to fight.
Yes, and the next game will be soon, but not soon enough. We will have a rest day coming up on a Tuesday. That is tomorrow. And then that will be followed by Game 12 and Game 13. We see there on Saturday will be the final game of the World Championship match, a standalone game. It will be in Game 12 and in Game 14 that Ding Liren will play with the white pieces. He does have tomorrow's rest to focus on the opening, the biggest problems that he can perhaps try to pose to Jan Nepomniachtchi. We are expecting a huge opening there by Ding coming out of that rest day. He did allude to looking at some fresh ideas, having that possibility of the rest day to try to surprise Jan Nepomniachtchi one more time. It's going to be an exciting day. And before we close, Fabi, I'm going to open the floor to you just for your final thoughts on the action that we saw today.
Yeah, it was probably the most quiet game that we've seen in the entire match. We saw a relatively quiet game the day before, but still some problems in the endgame we were speculating about. You know, is Jan in trouble in this endgame? Is he going to hold it? And it was close to being an unpleasant endgame, although he played excellently. But today, once they reached the endgame, there was no question in anyone's mind that this game is heading to a draw. There was only one moment in the game that I can point to where maybe Jan could have played on a little bit more or put more pressure on his opponent. And in fact, Jan also mentioned that in the press conference, the move queen to e2 instead of d takes e4. He said maybe this was the way to put some pressure on Ding, but it would have been exciting. I wish we had seen that and seen what would have happened in case of that. It would have been an exciting game. Instead, d takes c4. It looks like the players really needed a rest day, needed, a little bit of a break from all the action that we've been seeing these past few weeks in this incredibly exciting match. Back and forth games, and now a little bit more of a quiet period. But the last few games, I'm sure, will not be quiet because Ding has to win at least one of them.
He really does. And once again, the path gets narrower and narrower. Ding Liren is 1 point behind Jan Nepomniachtchi. It was a confident hold by Ding today with the black pieces, and he will be coming back with the white pieces in game 12. Tomorrow is a rest day. Robert, Fabi, thank you so much for all your amazing insights. And chat, a huge shout out to you for also being there and making this show so much fun with all your featured chats. We will be back with the action for game 12. Tomorrow's a rest day, and we leave you right now with all the fun that we had in game 11.
Jan is playing this also super confident. Since g5, not a single move has he thought for more than like 10 seconds, I think. Every move has been just bashed out instantly. I don't think that they will take too long to play this one out.
Ding Liren, he knows what he needs to do today, and that is not lose.
I'm expecting the jackets to come off. First moves are about to happen. The clocks have started. 1e4. That call was an easy one to make. But with Ding Liren, what will he start with? Will he reach out for c5? No, he goes with e5. The king's pawn opening. Fabi, you look disappointed.
A little bit.
c4, a big move, but a very committal one. And look at Jan. He's got that pose that we saw from him back in game 9, where he feels that perhaps he's got a bit of a chance here to try to create something. At this moment, for Ding Liren, if he was to lose a game, that would be essentially World Championship over. So it's very important for Ding. More important than creating chances is to make sure that he's able to keep things under control.
Robert, you called it. This is the D word. We're heading for a draw.
There's the handshake. It is a split point, which means Jan Nepomniachtchi keeps his 1 point advantage in this match.